blue lights in your rearview mirror, and then the words from the police officer, license and registration. Are your palms sweaty? Are you nervous? Are you angry? Are you scared? And what about the officer? Is he or she polite, gruff, rude? Police community interaction is different depending on the situation and usually perceived as adversarial. But what if there was a way to stop all of that? What if we trained officers to use positive reinforcement versus negative consequences? What if we instituted actively caring for people policing? I'm Barbara Ham-Lee, and we'll talk about a different style of policing. It's next on Another View, so stay tuned.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Welcome to Another View. It's called Actively Caring for People Policing, a different way of community policing where police officers are perceived as proactive agents of beneficial change, professionals who build constructive relationships among the citizens they serve. Now, that's the way our guest describes AC4P. Bobby Kipper is the co-author of Actively Caring for People Policing, and he is the founder and director of the National Center for the Prevention of Community Violence. And in full disclosure, I've just joined his advisory board based on our work here at Another View with Race Let's Talk About at our town halls. How you doing, Bobby?
Great, Barbara. Thanks for having me.
Good. I'm so happy to have you on the show today. So, AC4P, Actively Caring for People Policing. What's the premise behind it?
The premise behind it is that when the first engagement between a citizen and a police officer has always been sort of this, authoritative approach, and mainly because most time police officers are questioning people. A lot of times it is about they're disobeying the law. But we believe that interactions between law enforcement and citizens could always start on the positive. And those relationships, those first contacts are essential, even if it's just a contact in the parking lot of a store or just a questioning. We think that there is a way that officers can go about the approach and the training that they receive to build that positive relationship.
Because we talk a lot about the differences in communities in terms of how police are perceived.
Sure.
There's some communities where the policeman is your friend and, officer friendly and so forth. And there are other communities where police means run, police means fear, police means, something bad is going to happen. So this whole idea is to make a overall impression.
Absolutely. It's to build a bridge. I mean, obviously, we do know that there are communities that certainly fear police, and for a lot of reasons. Mm-hmm. A lot of the interactions in years past has been very negative between the police and some citizens that they've called to serve. And there's issues on both sides of that. And so we always have to look at where this respect begin, how does it start, and how can the police facilitate this? Because they are the government agents. They are coming from their perspective in whatever interaction they have with the citizen. And so the citizen views that, and they either view it out of fear or they view it out of some type of civility or understanding of why the police have to do what they have to do. And let's face it, we cannot have a society without police.
True.
So we have to make sure that we're putting the best foot forward to start with.
Mm-hmm. So there's science behind this.
Absolutely.
This actively caring for people.
This
is not just something that it's more than just, coming up and patting somebody on the shoulder and saying hello.
That's exactly right. And that's one of the reasons why we embraced it as a national organization. We're working with Dr. Scott Geller out of Virginia Tech, a long-term behavioral scientist. And he's been at Virginia Tech 47 years. And he's taught this philosophy and research. His thesis has always been that we build the climate and culture of every community through actively caring and proactive, interaction between people in that institution. And so we believe that that's something we can take from the research, and we actually can apply it to the street and to the training of police officers. Again, it's not based on our opinion. It's not the book that I wrote with Dr. Geller. It's based on research. It's based on applied behavioral science that's been proven. And so we're now taking that into policing even at the intermediate and the beginning stages of our training.
So Dr. Geller, and this movement started after the massacre of Virginia Tech back in 2007?
It actually started prior to that with his work in industry and safety. Exxon and a number of large corporations sort of embraced actively caring as part of the culture, their corporate culture. And then when Dr. Geller started doing that at the corporate level, he believed that he should be teaching this when he taught his psychology students. And I first met Dr. Geller. It's an interesting story, but I first met him because of my oldest daughter, Jolie, who attended Virginia Tech, and every freshman that attends Tech has to, go through a psychology class. Oh. She called me on the phone one day. She said, "Dad, you need to meet my psychology professor." Of course, that went over real big with Dad. All of a sudden, I need to talk to a psychologist who's on the staff at Virginia Tech. But it all went well. When I talked to Dr. Geller, Jolie was really intrigued with the actively caring for people process. And she said, "What attracts me about this message is that when I listen to Dr. Geller talk, it's almost like I'm listening to you give one of your speeches. It's all about raising human rights, raising, the way we treat each other in community." And so I got really intrigued by this. And, I'm a researcher and a reader, and I started reading about it. And it turned me on to the fact that I thought, this is based on science. Why aren't we doing this? And so I went and met with Scott Geller, and he became a partner. And we became the center across the United States as applying actively caring into communities across America.
So there are several police departments around the nation that
Absolutely.
are engaging in this. So let's get specific so that people will understand exactly what it is. So can you give us a scenario of actively caring policing?
Sure. Let's say an officer is in the community and they actually see someone who's helping someone in the community. Most people look at policing as incident driven. There's a history to policing that's really misunderstood in the community. Okay. Most people see that the only time you interact with a police officer is when they're called to the situation or when you're stopped for a violation of law. We know that the research tells us that simply meeting police through incidents is not the proper way of policing communities. And so that was the basis for community policing, where we learned that instead of just, responding to calls for service, the police ought to be interacting with the community before the calls for service. That way, you're building a society of people who are connected in the cause instead of waiting until everything falls apart. Mm-hmm. It's almost like not getting involved in some situation until there's a crisis. Well, we know the research shows that that's not the way to handle any situation. Exactly. It's the same way from policing. So police officers have learned, and police leadership in this country have learned, that community policing and relationship building is the way to relate police services. So in actively caring for people, what we advocate is training police officers to meet people on the front end of the behavioral continuum before there's a behavior issue. In other words, a citizen is helping someone in the community. The police officer stops, approaches the citizen, and rewards them with a blue wristband and thanks them for actively caring for someone else in their community. And if you can imagine what it would be like to be on the street somewhere and all of a sudden an officer came up to reward you for good behavior. And this goes beyond just paying it forward as some police departments. This is different than giving a Slurpee coupon. This is actually rewarding a person for a specific act of kindness towards someone else in the community. And what a positive relationship that would build between people. Not only the officer and the citizen, but the feeling of the citizen going forward with other police officers and even other members of the community, which they engage.
So this would be training that police officers would get, those who are coming into the department as well as those who are on staff. But is this just for the community, as they call them, the community police officers, or is this the SWAT team too?
This is industry. We want this to be industry related. We feel like that we are out to change the way that we do community policing training from the ground level, from the recruit level police officer all the way to the chief. We feel like that we embrace community policing, and community policing is the right way to do police work. Again, research proves that out. But where is the training? Where does the advocacy begin for officers to buy into this recognition of the power of positive consequences. And we think that that's something that we should address from the beginning police officer all the way through each police department.
So, Bobby, you were a retired police officer from Newport News. You worked there for many years. And we did a town hall recently. It was called The Talk. And it was about the conversation that minority families have with their kids about how they should react if they get stopped by the police and so forth. And one of our people in the audience stood up, and he said something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing here. He was a professor. He said, if a professor has a bad day, you might get a bad grade in my class. But if a police officer has a bad day, you might get shot. Now, when you hear that from your police perspective, as well as now from the founder of the Center for Preventing Violence, how do you react to that, and how do we start to change that perception?
Well, it's interesting because of everything that's happened here in the last few years in our society, and through the media and through even the coverage of some of the events between police and citizens. It saddens me to understand that, yes, there are times and there are situations that have occurred where law enforcement in this country has absolutely fell on its face in the way that we've handled situations. And there's been a history in some departments, some communities, about how officers have related to, urban cultures and people of color. And we have to recognize that. You cannot go back and repair all of those things instantly. But institutionally, we think with the training up front, to basically imply the fact that human rights comes before any other rights as far as we're concerned. And that's got to be ingrained. One of the things that I do is teach a lot of human rights training to police officers. And we actually start out our class by reciting the phrase, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." And what that means to all of us is that we should embrace what we already know. Our forefathers set this in place. And if anyone were to represent that and understand that, it should be agents of the government. And so that's exactly where we're going with this. The statement that gentleman made, saddens me, but it does not totally shock me.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. How would you react if a police officer walked up to you and rewarded you for an act of kindness? What would you think about that? Let's hear from you. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. In that same conversation, there was a lot of discussion about training and how police officers are trained. So let's not, without talking about AC4P right now, but what's the current training, and then how do you anticipate seeing AC4P being brought into what's going on?
It's a great question, Barbara. One of the things that we did when we started this process is we analyzed law enforcement training not only at the local, state, but national level. We did some research on the number of hours that officers are trained in community policing and community building. Now, we do understand that that's increased in a lot of places, has increased over the last number of years, but we also know that there needs to be a basic process at the beginning to start with. And so what we're advocating with AC4P is that this become part of institutionalizing the training for officers in community policing at the beginning of their academy. Now, the issue with that is that we already have a lot of officers who have been through academy a long time ago.
Yes.
So you have to indoctrinate it into, it's almost as we've done community policing. When you look at the definition of community policing, it's really interesting because one definition calls it a process and one definition calls it a philosophy. What do
you see it as?
I see it as a way to do business. I see it as institutionally embracing the community first. Instead of having an idea that we have a top-down idea of policing, to the citizens, it should be an idea of the citizens up. What are the basic needs of citizens to begin with, and how do we engage in their needs, and how do we improve their needs by that social interaction, starting with a positive sense, so they really realize that you're there as an assistance giver and not as someone from the top down.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Rachel joins us from Chesapeake. Hi, Rachel. You're on the air.
Hi. So I just kind of wanted to call and give kind of my 2 cents. I think that if a police officer gave me a band for, doing an act of kindness, I would be kind of shocked, but also very, touched and excited about it. But my kind of question is that enough? Is that still doing enough to the issues that plague our society today?
That's a good question. Let's let Bobby answer that. Thanks so much for the call, Rachel. We appreciate it. Well, she says, is that enough?
Well, that's an interesting perspective, Rachel. And I would say that what actually is enough when you're in a situation, we think that what we want to relate is the fact that it's not just giving the wristband out to the community that fulfills the program. The obligation of the program is the training of the officers. So when you're looking at the training of the officers, is it enough to really train them on the front end of the behavioral continuum, on the power of positive consequences, on the relevancy of building relationships from the ground floor to citizens up? We believe that the training is every bit more important aspect than actually giving the blue wristband. The blue wristband is just the outcome.
The outcome and an outward way to show people that you're engaged. So let's talk some specifics because there's 7 lessons in the book. Are you ready for this, Bobby?
I'm ready.
You're going to teach me real quick, right?
Ready.
So the first lesson is employ more positive consequences.
Sure.
Explain.
Well, again, consequences, we always look at consequences as a negative. And again, it's the top-down thought process of authority, punishment, and what we're going to do to make your life worse. But when we look at the definition of consequences, it's really a choice, of a result of a choice that you choose. Now, you can choose to do positive things, and where do we go into our society where we relate to that and where we reward that? So we all have this issue. I mean, from parenting all the way through, we've got to admit our society is sort of a little bit in a civility craze right now. But if we started going back to the basic concept of the power of positive consequences is relating to what people do well, relating to how they, treat each other, how they respect each other, and how in actively caring, how they go the second or third mile to appreciate each other, what we have brought to the table, what we've done, our act of kindness, what we related to one another. So the power of positive consequences is something we don't talk about, especially in police training. It's a human aspect.
I like the example you used in the book was click it or ticket. I mean, everything is a negative.
Right, exactly.
A negative as opposed to a positive consequence.
Right. Well, an example would be, how many times, even when I was on the police department in my 26 years service, where, you'd be in a restaurant and the child would be acting up. And the first thing the parents would say, if you don't behave yourself, I'm going to have that police officer take you out of here. The public's perception of policing has been authoritative, top-down, punitive, without any regard to understanding that relationship building is where most police departments and most police leaders in America are trying to get their departments to go.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call. If you're a police officer and you're out there listening to this, what do you think about it? Give us a call and let us know if you think that the power of positive policing and helping others is a better way to approach your work. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. So we also talk about observational learning.
That is correct. And one of the things we learn is that, we also should learn from someone else that does it better than we do. And so in policing, an example would be that we feel like that the newer officers ought to learn from the veteran officers. But what I always say is learn from everybody. And the bottom line is that a lot of times we really see things around us, but we really don't take it to improve our own game. And what we're saying by the power of observational learning is learn from the best. And when it comes to actively caring, learn from those people who have already exhibited kindness. We have officers, and I want to make it clear today, too, on the show that we have officers in police departments that are doing a great job at this. And, we didn't invent community policing, and I don't want people to think that. What we're trying to do is enhance community policing through our training and through our process, and that's what this is all about.
So how much time in the average police department, how much time is spent on community policing training versus tactical training versus whatever else it's taught?
Well, first of all, the answer to that question is not enough, not nearly enough. When you look at the scales, and in reality, I mean, there are technical aspects to policing as well as laws of arrest and defensive driving, defensive tactics, and arrest procedures and things that they have to know about. I mean, but what has traditionally happened in most academies and in most training is that has been pretty much the bulk of the training. In our research, we showed that there are some academies or some basic police training that only gave about 8 hours and about 18 weeks to community policing and building relationships. And, we're challenging and we want that to change. We don't think we need half the academy to do the job of training in people skills. However, we do think it needs to be expanded. It needs to be more than just a block here and a block there. This should be a concentrated effort on people really understanding how to build community and relate.
And actually, couldn't it also be a part of, ultimately, to become a part of all of the training? So in other words, rather than separate it out to say, okay, now here's your community policing training with AC4P, yes,
right.
That it becomes part of the institution of policing regardless of what you do.
You're right. And that's exactly the reason why if you begin it at the recruit level and you do it all the way through your organization, then it becomes institutionalized. And the best way to institutionalize any process, we believe, is to start at that basic level. And with that, over time period, you will institutionalize it if we buy into the training up front. And I agree with you. It all should center around community building, relationship building. And again, the technical aspects, they have to be trained in that, but we also have to emphasize more of the community.
Okay, we got several calls here. Let's go to a couple of them. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Judy joins us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Judy. You're on the air.
Hi there. I wanted to express that just yesterday, I think I experienced what he might be describing today on the show. As a citizen, I called the police and reported someone in a handicap place, a parking place, and they spent about 20 minutes shopping. And in the meantime, I called an officer, and they were a while coming. And the woman and I had an encounter because she was very unhappy that someone was on the way and that I spoke to her. But the officer that came, as he said, he wanted me to feel warm and fuzzy when this was over because he wasn't going to give her a ticket. And I found that very frustrating, and he knew that. So I think he was trying to not give a ticket, and yet I was really disappointed. I felt like she was wrong. She admitted she was wrong. She told the officer she'd been there all that time, and then proceeded to actually lie about the incident, say I was going to attack her. I mean, it was just not a good encounter for me. And yet it seems to be along the lines of what he's trying to describe today, that he said, well, I don't want to give her a ticket. I really didn't quite understand all that if you're in a handicapped space, you're breaking the law. And she admitted it. Said, oh,
okay,
I won't do it again.
So Judy, let me ask you a question then. So you're in your mind, if you break the law, whatever the consequence should be, it should be a negative consequence. Am I stating what you're trying to state correctly? In other words, should she have been? You would have preferred that she was cited for breaking the law.
Absolutely. If you've ever been handicapped or had someone who was, people who do this and then admit that they did it, but they didn't do it for that long, and the officer did have a discussion with her about her being totally wrong in doing that. And her grandson was there and her son, who she called to her aid. And he did address that. He sort of, I guess you might say, shamed her in front of her family and tried to explain to her what a terrible example it was in front of her son, and that she should, in fact, go home and have a discussion with him and admit what she had done was not correct, was against the law, even though he wasn't going to give her a ticket. And so he made it a teachable moment. But for me, I felt like it takes a village, and when the village steps up to say, here's someone breaking the law, and could you please send someone to address this issue, it seemed to be addressed like, well, you're just two women who can't control yourself.
All right, Judy, let me let Bobby respond, and we appreciate your phone call. So it sounded like the officer was trying to diffuse the situation. Obviously, neither one of us was there, so we don't know the whole story.
It's hard over the history of me being involved in policing and out of policing to sometimes try to referee or try to be the advocate or for the police or non-police. I mean, the good thing about policing is discretion is the better part of rule. And I would say that there are times when enforcement is necessary, but there are also times, I like what Judy said. She said it was a teachable moment.
Exactly.
So at what point do we say that, that they didn't
really
do their job?
Is part of AC4P, is determining sometimes when those are teachable moments as opposed to putting the hammer down more.
It is. And I can understand from Judy's perspective when we report a law violation and we care that much that we're staying with it, that we just want to see, we want to see the hammer drop. We want to see that enforcement. And I get that. But the bottom line also, too, is that I think the beauty of policing is discretion. And when someone says that, he talked to the woman and her son and really made it that teachable moment, I wasn't there, and I can't say yay or nay, but I don't see an issue in policing with the way it was handled. Not every situation bears a summons or bears a warrant or bears an arrest.
Yeah, I kind of like it sometimes when they let me off with a warning.
I bet.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about community policing using the tenets of behavioral science to build positive police-citizen relations. My guest is Bobby Kipper, founder and director of the National Center for the Prevention of Community Violence. Let's go to Gene in Newport News. Hi, Gene. You're on the air.
How you guys doing this afternoon?
Doing okay.
Good. I just wanted to respond to the comments on the community policing. I will tell you on the positive side, it's very refreshing to hear solutions being put out there. I'm also looking for, psychology behind on trying to improve the relationships amongst communities, both for different demographics, both racially and financially. I think the first thing is a worldwide, almost nationwide kind of, I would say, admittance that there's an issue. As a citizen, I still feel like there isn't a world, a large sweeping amongst the police, countrywide, that there's actually a problem of some systemic issues happening. There seems to be more of an emphasis on justification for some of the things instead of just admitting it or turning a blind eye. And I tend to go by the principle that if you don't condemn it, you condone it. So I think this dialogue definitely opens up the doors to admit that there is a systemic issue, and that there is a large number of citizens who are scared with dealing with police officers. I think beginning to remove that authoritative kind of persona. My parents live in Denby. My parents isn't the police, right? So to talk to me in a manner or, where it's authoritative. Now, one thing, if you're on the side of, doing an infraction and you're not following the law, of course, being told that, hey, you're not doing that. So as far as the interactions, when someone's defiant, but the authoritative thing to reward citizens, I think that also kind of gives off that authoritative kind of persona that you're rewarding me, similar to a parent or a teacher or a supervisor, that, you're rewarding down to a subordinate may possibly give off a wrong perception. And I would just say,
All right. Gene, let me let Bobby respond to that, because that's an interesting perspective. So your premise of handing out the band, acknowledging the reward, or acknowledging the good work rather, could be seen as a negative as opposed to a positive. Is that right?
Yes, and
Okay.
I think before you go on to implement something like that to bring the community together, we need folks and police officers admitting that, hey, these specific accounts of police violence, or if someone was to find that was wrong, and if another police officer speaks up against that, they shouldn't have to face any negative retribution from either their police unit or the community.
Okay.
That's the first step into fixing it, is admitting that there's an issue.
Okay.
Very few are saying it, but not in the aggregate. And that's the issue we see. Admit that there's an issue, and then we can begin to heal and work together.
Okay, Gene, thanks so much. We appreciate that phone call. Go ahead, Bobby, respond.
Well, I think that systematically that there has been some growth in this area of admitting that policing is not always on the right side of how it's treated, people of color, people in communities, specifically certain communities. I think at the same time, the aspect of changing the entire culture of policing in the country is not something that's easily done. But there are all kinds of training programs out there now about implicit bias. The federal government came down with programs. I know Norfolk and their chief and their police department has been involved in such training. And I know even you do some diversity training. There are people throughout the country and community, people like you and other people who are stepping up to the plate to really deal in this diversity issue and understanding the implicit ideas of what's happened in the past and what continues to happen in certain communities. So I think that, from the perspective of his saying that there has not been a systematic admission, I mean, you're not going to have industry-wide people admitting that they're wrong because that's just not going to happen. But at the same time, from the leadership perspective, I think that we've seen there are ways that we have not built the bridges that we should in certain communities and with people of color. And I think that that was the start of training and the implementation of what we've seen over the last several years. Has it fixed the problem? Absolutely not. It's not totally fixed the problem. But
there is movement.
There is movement. And to say that people have not admitted or that that's a starting place, I would agree that is a starting place, but I would also defend policing in the country to say that the police have started at that place and we're moving on it.
And we've been talking all this hour about what the police are doing, but what's the community's responsibility in this? I mean, actively caring for people, policing is a two-way street.
It is. It absolutely is. And, we have, just as the police has a culture within their industry, there are communities and citizens and again, certain communities where there's a culture there of people, the growth of gangs, the growth of, the violence among drug gang members and things of that nature that totally control certain communities. I mean, we've got to break that up on both sides. It can't be just the police telling the police they're wrong, or it can't be the citizen telling the police they're wrong. I mean, citizens bear a responsibility. And, we understand there's a fear level and there's a level of disregard sometimes for authority and for the police and communities. But we've got to all work to fix that. The police are not going to be top-down fixing that alone. They have to be joined by citizens who advocate. We really do want to meet in the middle and get along with this.
I thought we were about to go to Carl, and he just hung up. So let's go to Beth in Chesapeake. Hi, Beth. You're on the air.
Hi. That's a perfect segue. I really appreciate that point. It's sort of this us against them, and that is never going to work, no matter how many programs or books or fancy things we come up with. It never has, it never will. So I was just going to speak to the part of, you brought up gangs, and there is a really successful program out in L.A., and it's one of the only ones that's ever really, you talked about evidence-based and science. And I'm not sure if, I didn't catch your name. I know you worked with Dr. Geller, so I apologize.
His name is Bobby Kipper.
Oh, okay. Officer Kipper. His name is Gregory Boyle, and the book is Tattoos on the Heart.
Okay.
So I would highly, have you heard of it?
Yes, actually, Bobby, I was just getting ready to let him respond to that because
Absolutely.
he also does a lot of work with gangs.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. Father Greg Boyle is a hero of mine, and I've done not only a lot of work with Dr. Boyle, but he is he started the ministry out there to where he rebuilds gang members, and it's totally awesome. And I wrote a book called No Colors, 100 Ways to Keep Gangs from Taking Away Our Communities.
Yes, and we're going to be talking about that later on in the year. Yes.
And so we actually dedicated that book to the work of Gregory Boyle. So I'm very familiar with him, and I'm glad you're familiar with his work because it is groundbreaking work and something that we totally support. And he basically set the bar for all of us that want to try to reduce gangs.
Simple suggestion is, and I don't want to take up too much time, is this. One, do we have, and I think it's real cost effective, when you're recruiting, what is the psychological qualifications and where do you have, what goes on there? And I would say, okay, if you're in the academy, because again, we don't have a lot of money, you don't have these things. Everyone reads this. There's training online that people can do. In healthcare, we don't always get paid for a lot of the training we do. And, then who's really vested and really wants to do this community training. So that would be one thing. Every recruit, this is mandatory reading. You got to do this, because it changes it. It's not us against them. It's everything built in love. It's sort of the old, walking the beat. And then that really lessens the fear. And it makes everybody buy into the system. Nobody wants, I get so sick and tired of pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Well, they don't have hands, fingers, or even boots. So that's one point. And the other one, having lived in Baltimore when I was in nursing school, I got to tell you, it's a really lovely idea, the blue wristbands, and I get that. But I'm laughing thinking some of these people will be like, yeah, take your wristband. So, but I think that's a great start. And then maybe quarterly or something, have something in their communities where the police come out and they're actually recognized, like in a town hall. And then you develop the community leaders. That doesn't take a lot of money. And then they take the ball and roll with it. And then you have community responsibility. And it's just a loving, positive action. And I just think people shouldn't be afraid to put actual words like love in the language, both on the police side and most definitely in the communities.
Thank you, Beth, for your call and those very thoughtful comments that you've made. Go ahead, Bobby.
Well, we do agree with that, and as a matter of fact, we've worked with some folks locally. Tony Brothers, well-known NBA official here locally, and Men for Hope, his organization. We all work together to try to develop a positive online program where actively caring would be trained online, and people could do it on their own. Within policing. But part of what Tony and Men for Hope brought to the table is bringing the community in to also be trained, and the officer would meet the citizen.
Absolutely.
And then they would have the feedback one to another, and we would have these citizens group that would grow. There would be as many people in the community being trained to actively care as there would be officers trained.
Let me go back to a point that she made of the psychological makeup or what you look for in a police recruit. Now, I had the privilege of working with Prince George's County Police in Maryland for 3 years, and I know that the education level has been raised quite a bit from the way it used to be. But what else do police departments look for in terms of what makes a good police officer?
Well, I think it's really interesting that when we look at recruiting and evaluating who we're getting in, police departments have to hire from the same employment line as other employers. I think sometimes we think that there are just people that are cut out just to apply for a police job. And the understanding of it is police departments have a very difficult time, finding those qualified people. I mean, when you think about it, what's the arrest record? I mean, and most people, what kind of drugs have these people used, and when's the last time they used a drug? You think about our society, you think about exactly the general people walking in the community or in your local mall. I mean, those are the people that actually apply to be police officers. So psychologically, we do have to weed them out. I mean, they weed it out through, oral boards. They have to pass certain, tests and qualifications. But it's very difficult. I mean, over the years, because of the nature of our national culture, those job-related available candidates have sort of shrunk for policing all over America. So
I know that was a big concern when I was working in Prince George's.
It is very difficult, and it's a highly regarded position that you can take away people's personal rights and their liberties, and so what kind of power do you give that type of person, and what type of person are you giving that type of power? Mm-hmm. That is the magic question in policing, and it's become more and more difficult. I think they're trying to weed through the best of the best and get the best they can. Mm-hmm.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Would love to hear from police officers out there. If you're listening, give us a call and let us know what you think about this type of community policing, and is it realistic? There are some really hardcore neighborhoods. You know, I'm the chair of the Norfolk Redevelopment Housing Authority. Obviously, we have within our public housing unit some pretty tough neighborhoods. And the experience with police there, I guarantee you, is quite different than the experience that someone may have, say, at Lynn Haven Mall. Could this work in that neighborhood? And what will it take in order to start to change the mindset, particularly of the community, to be accepting of a police officer who wants to practice AC4P policing?
Great question. I think two things have to happen. Number one is I think that, relationally we have to start with the training of our officers from the beginning all the way through the organization. But at the same time, we have to offer the same message and same training to citizens in our citizen watch groups. How do you reach the hardcore? How do you reach the person who basically is defiant? And yes, you're right. I mean, the city of Norfolk, as well as other area Hampton Roads cities, have pocketed communities that are really creating a lot of major issues and homicides and violence. And how do you get to those people? You have to be street level in your approach, but you can be street level in your approach and still actively care. And so that's the key issue here. The key issue is that we've got to start. There are a couple things that we have to do in our society to embrace the issue of human rights and policing. Number one, when we encounter someone in the community, are we mad at you or are we scared of you? And that's the same question that I would ask, not only from the police to the citizen, but how about we ask that question from the citizen to the police? Mm-hmm. When you see an officer in uniform and you're out there on the street and you're the normal citizen, are you angry at that officer simply because of the position they hold? Or are you scared of that officer because of the position they hold? These are issues in communities that we have to talk about. We cannot stop the dialogue. And what we hope that Actively Caring does is opens up that dialogue. You can't open up that dialogue when you're in handcuffs.
Sure.
You have to open up that dialogue before we even start to think about handcuffs.
There was a lot of criticism from some community members last year when when Norfolk started the midnight basketball,
sure,
and they brought in wraparound services and so forth, so that if people were interested in finding out that type of information. But are those programs, I know they're designed to work to change that dynamic between the citizen and the police officer, but do they really work?
I do think those programs work in concert with other programs. One of the things that we do in prevention and intervention, unfortunately, in our society, is we try a program for a little bit, and if we don't see totally drastic changes, we throw it out. We give it away.
And we need to take time to make it happen.
We cannot be a Baskin Robbins or, an ice cream shop of prevention.
31 flavors.
we have to write, what month is it, or who's got the grant funding.
Yeah.
We have to find, situations that absolutely have a proven track record, research-based efforts. And there is a lot of research that says that those type of programs, when you're giving wraparound services to citizens, as well as how you're going to get them in there. Well, basketball gets them in there. It's not the basketball. See, the common person on the street basically looks at, well, why are we using government money to put lights on so people can play basketball? But Barbara, you said something differently today. You said wraparound services. So you get them in there and you work on getting them the GED. You work on giving them an opportunity possibly to go to college. Maybe you have people come in that are looking for people in the community to go to work. We've got to stop throwing people away in our society and start promoting ways for them to make a difference in society.
Absolutely.
When we start doing that from the community level up, and that includes policing down, we're going to make a difference.
So when you get a recruit in, you train them, they're all excited, they want to do this community policing, and then they get into their precinct, and then you got that sergeant that's been sitting there forever, or that lieutenant or whatever, who has a whole different attitude. How do you manage that dynamic so that that young recruit doesn't lose his enthusiasm, but maybe even this spills over into that crotchety sergeant, as they say?
Well, maybe I can start with my own career that will help you with that.
Okay.
I joined the Newport News Police Department in 1977. It was policing in the 70s and the 80s is not like right. I mean, you're talking about numbers and everybody was doing what they were trained to do. I mean, you're trained to arrest, you're trained to enforce the law, and traditionally that's been the mindset. But you're right. How do you come in all of a sudden when people have been trained a certain way institutionally and tell them that you're doing it all wrong? Mm-hmm. You can't do that. You can't tell them that. But what you can do is you go in and you show them the research about building the relationships, what's proven to work. And, for a lot of these people, it's a way of life for them, just like it's a way of life for people in certain communities. So for police officers, the way they were trained 10, 15 years ago is the way that they're going to perceive and do their job. Right. It doesn't make them wrong. That's the way they were trained to do their job. Mm-hmm. If we don't shift our paradigm in our training and start that to sandwich it, we believe that the leadership of the organization should embrace actively caring, training for their police officers. Once that's embraced by the leadership and the bottom core, the basic officer going in, then we're going to sandwich it, and eventually it's going to be, it's going to move on.
And just like they have to keep training on firearm safety
Absolutely.
And all that, same thing. They still have to continue to learn to grow.
That's exactly
in
right.
Policing.
Right. In Virginia, there's a required, every so many years to be recertified in in-service training and policing programming. So we certainly can make this part of in-service.
Let's go to Odell in Newport News. Hi, Odell. You're on the air.
Hi. How are you?
Okay.
I worked with Bobby professionally years ago. I worked with the at-risk children, and he did a great job then and was dedicated. And I really just wanted to say that I'm so proud of what he's doing.
Oh, well, thank you very much. So,
thank you, Odell. I remember those times, and and what you did for detention, kids, and trying to really educate them, and you've really changed a lot of lives for the positive. So we appreciate who you are.
Thank you so much for that call. Let's go to Alicia in Virginia Beach. Hi, Alicia. You're on the air.
Yes, hi. Thank you for letting me talk. I love your show.
Thank you.
I just want to say that because of the political atmosphere from D.C., there are a lot of Latinos that are walking around very fearful. If you look brown and you look Mexican, sometimes people don't stop to think, well, maybe you were born here. And I want to just commend the Norfolk Police Department because they've been proactive in reaching out to the community to try to lessen that fear. But then on another little topic, sometimes I think if people, whether they're policemen or not, if they would just speak to one another as they want to be spoken to, then sometimes that would go a long ways for people not getting really upset and agitated. Because sometimes a policeman, I know they have to keep authority and be in charge, but sometimes when you talk to an adult like they're a child, then it's not good.
Yeah, exactly. That exacerbates the problem. We're short on time, Alicia, so I'm going to let Bobby respond to that. Thank you.
That's a great point. And one of the things we do in actively caring training in the aspect, and even the book that we wrote that you have a copy of, talks about instead of the golden rule, which we've always lived by the golden rule, treat others like you want to be treated. In this training, we advocate the platinum rule. Treat others like they'd want to be treated. In other words, start at a respect level for the person you're dealing with and not with your own feelings.
Because you have to understand that different people come from different perspectives.
They do. And respect is at the same level regardless of the level you come from. It doesn't really, it takes the guesswork out of how you treat people. So if you treat people like, we know going out, think about it. When you meet people, you got to really feel like that they want to be treated well. They want to be treated kind and with respect. And that's really what the Platinum Rule is all about. Treat people like they want to be treated. Don't treat them like you think, or, don't.
Like they should be treated.
And it really takes out a lot of the thought, and we talk a lot about the thought of bias. And the Platinum Rule really takes that to another level in the right way.
So we've got about 3 minutes left. Tell me about the National Center for the Prevention of Community Violence.
The National Center for the Prevention of Community Violence, and we're so happy that you're part of our board.
Thank you.
And we've grown since 2009. I founded the organization here in Hampton Roads, and it's grown all over the country. We work in schools in Oakland, California, and in places in Arizona and in North Carolina. We've expanded, and it's a national organization to try to bring the best resources and ideas to communities across the country on addressing violence before it happens. I believe that violence is a process and not an event. I think the research shows that. And so our role at the National Center is to find solutions in communities to interrupt that process. And we feel like by instituting behavioral science programs, other programs to prevent bullying, gang reduction strategies in communities, we're busy working to try to stop it before it begins. And that's the premise of why I'm here today and the premise of this book and the things that we do.
Mm-hmm. So if people want to get involved, what do they do?
They can.
And how can they get involved?
Well, we love volunteers. We're always looking for volunteers to help us put our programs out into communities, working in schools. We need volunteers to help as interns with our programming. We can use technical assistance and web development and website. And they can get in touch with us by they can actually email me directly if they want to at Bobby Kipper at solveviolence.com. Just email me directly, and I'll make sure that you get on board to help us in whatever way you can help us.
So how optimistic are you that one day we will look up and say AC4P is policing? Absolutely. That's just the way it is.
You know, Barbara, before I found a research behavioral science-based process that I believe has lasting impact and lasting effect on people, I was scratching my head a little bit to find a solution. But I think if we're doing anything, we have to do it on science. This is behavioral science, and I now understand that. And so I'm very optimistic. I hope we have AC4P schools. I hope in the future we have AC4P communities. Just think about the civility change in this country and how that would work.
And does it concern you at all about the actual teachers of this? I mean, can anybody learn it, or is there a special way that the instructors need to be taught in order to make it work?
We do a instructors train-to-trainer aspect, and again, we have our whole online process through Graduate America that we encourage departments to get into as well as fall, even on-site training if possible.
Okay. So that's Bobby Kipper. He is the founder and the executive director and everything else that goes with the National Center for the Prevention of Community Violence. And the book is Actively Caring for People Policing, Building Positive Police-Citizen Relations. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Barbara.
I really appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
And thank you for taking the time to listen to Another View. If you'd like to hear this show again or share it with a friend, please go to our website, anotherviewradio.org, and you can download the podcast. And while you're there, you can sign up for our eView newsletter. It's a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. And we're on Facebook, so like us. And I'm on Twitter at Barbara Ham Lee. Very easy to remember. And a reminder that The Art of Supper, featuring former NFL player and now fitness guru Daryl Haley, is Sunday, June 11th at 5 at the Planners Club in Suffolk. Go to healthysuffolkva.org for ticket information. I'm the MC, and I sure would love to have you join us. Next week, our Another View Roundtable pundits with their take on today's current events. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Hannah Martin stepped in for Lisa Godley today as our show producer. Victor Bowen is our audio engineer, and Trey Watson answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Thanks again for listening to Another View.